Hi, I'm Kelly, and I'm with Karyn, and we're going to continue answering some questions about grief and loss. And so today we're taking a bit of a shift and we're going to talk about what are some best ways to support somebody that you know that is grieving? What can you do? Okay, you just experienced your friend or family member just experienced a significant loss. What should you do? What should you say? How can you actually help them? So I'm
Yeah.
curious, what is some advice or some tips that you can give to somebody who's like, "Oh, what do I say? What do I do? I'm not sure. I want to avoid them, but I know I should do something."
Yeah. Because like we've said before, nobody wants to be talking about all this. And I'm sure because of what we do, I know I get asked this just in my personal life a ton. You probably do as well.
Yeah.
The one of the first things I say to people is like, okay, so open up your calendar, flip it 6 months from now, and circle a date and put, call your friend with their name on it, and then do it another 6 months. And then, to be keeping in touch and recognizing there's so much focus on like bringing over food and flowers and like that early check in.
Mhm.
And yes, I think we do still want to continue to be a part of those things, as that's very important for people to feel that early support, but understanding that how quickly that support falls away and that people return to their lives, sort of leaving the grieving person to fend for themselves oftentimes. So I think what's hard about supporting a grieving person is that if you ask the grieving person what do they want, they will not be able to tell you.
No, they won't. Exactly.
So that leaves a person like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do with that? Like, I heard a great thing the other day. Someone's like, if you're struggling, do you want me to talk to you or do you want me to leave you alone? And they're like, yes, both, please.
Exactly.
I want
Exactly.
both of those and probably
Mhm.
at the same time.
Mhm.
So it does make it hard. So a lot of times you're going to be kind of venturing into places that you may feel uncomfortable with, but your friend, your family member who's had the loss, they don't know necessarily any better. But I think it's demonstrating a willingness to be present. I mean, I think presence is huge, kind of making a space, not hiding from it. Talking about the loss, especially their person,
Saying their
is not,
name.
yes, yeah, it's not something to be afraid of or scared off of. And I think as much as you can recognize that, like, this is going to be a long journey. I think when I'm talking to the person who's had the loss and they're like, what do I tell my friends? What do I say? I try to remind them that, like, your friend doesn't understand what this process is looking like for you. And so the one thing that you can ask for is their patience, and their time. I think if grieving people don't feel rushed, I think if someone's acknowledging, like, they're still like, how are you doing? Are you okay? Do you want to talk today? Like, do you need to go for a walk or something? People are like, oh my gosh, like, you're still asking me, because everybody else has stopped asking.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I think it's sometimes I think the focus is on, like, what should I say? And what I try to remind people is, like, there's nothing you can say, that's right, or that's going to make them feel better. There's not the thing that is going to, like, take this all away. Or, I've had people tell me that their friends will send them like funny memes and jokes as like a distraction. And it's like, okay, if that feels appropriate, but like, we're not trying to make them forget necessarily. They want you to remember with them. That's what I think is more what it comes down to.
Yeah. I agree completely. There's so many things that I was like, "Oh, I wanna say this, I wanna say this,
Yeah.
I should get some notes." But, some of the research shows that, like, 6 weeks is when it hits the hardest for somebody, and I think that's because, the flowers have died, the casseroles have been eaten, the phone has stopped ringing, the cards have stopped coming in,
Yeah.
right? And so, sometimes I wait, and I don't send the card right away. And I wait a little while, and I'll send some grief books as well, to the person and give them something. And because, yes, we want to be there in the beginning, but a lot of times, how many of your clients, they don't even remember who was at the
Oh
funeral.
yeah. Yeah. No idea.
I
Yeah.
had a client, she went through cards from 3 years ago, and she's like, "I can't believe this person sent me a card every single week." So she was sending thank you cards from the funeral and
Oh,
from the cards 3 years later,
oh my
because
gosh. Yeah.
3 years later, she was able to, like, take it all in and absorb it and read and the memories and how much they meant to her. But right early grief, like, that's out of your head, like, you can't
Yeah.
even focus enough to be able to do that. And so I love the idea of putting things on the calendar. Remember their loved one's birthday and
Mm.
reach out to them. Remember their loved one's anniversary of their death. It's okay to reach out to them on those days, to send cards, to check in with them, to try to plan something with them, right? And we have to think about everybody has different strengths. And one of the big topics in the grief worlds is like support systems, right? And there's Ken Doka talks a lot about, who are the listeners, who are the doers, and who are the respite people. And the respite people are the ones that you can kind of take breaks from your grief with. And we really need to realize what we can be for somebody,
Mm. Yeah.
because there's people out there that aren't great listeners, but they're really good doers. They're going to come and help that widow be able to start up the lawnmower for the first time, but they're not going to want to sit around and talk about their that person, right? And so I think we have to realize what our strengths are and maybe be aware for that. And also the person that's grieving, be open to understanding that not everybody is going to fill every role.
Yeah. That is so important. I like, because I hear people say sometimes, again, this is on the grieving side, they say, well, you figure out who your friends are.
Hmm.
And I'll say, well, that's true to a degree. You're figuring out who your grief friends are. You're
Yes,
figuring out who are
like
the
that.
people who are maybe a little bit more, comfortable with the grief and for whatever reason can be there. I'm like, but don't write off the people who can't,
Mhm.
because there will come a time that this won't necessarily be the thing that's always foremost on your mind, that you have to talk about or want to talk about or have a presence for everywhere you go. Like that friend who was, super fun, and the person who really helps take your mind off things, if they're not what you need right now, they probably will be what you need down the road. So like, try not to like write off anybody, especially if they've been a decent friend up till that point, you know.
Well, and so I want to share this with you. You haven't heard me tell you this, but just yesterday in one of my sessions, one of my clients was really struggling with a family member. So I had given her your tool from the grief experience,
Ah,
which is writing a letter and talking about how you're dealing with your grief and how you've changed, and basically asking for support and patience, right, on the grief journey. And so she spent the full week working on her letter, and she was ready to give it to her sibling. And being able to talk about that and being able to just say, here, this is what I'm going through, I think is so, so important,
yeah.
and valid. And whether the other person takes that, but it's a really great tool. I'm really grateful that you use that in the book, because I've used it several times with my clients and it's all been very positive and helpful. And although we're talking about the other side, I do think it's a great tool for somebody who's grieving to be able to express to somebody who maybe not be getting it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because the important part, and thank you for that. The thing that's important about it, when we talk about the friend, and as we're talking to a person who's trying to support them, it can be very confusing, because you look at your friend and you're like, That's my friend. I've known them for 20 years. I know everything about them." Remembering that you haven't met this version yet, that they're feeling very different with all the things that they're going through and all the losses they're experiencing. One of the biggest losses they're feeling is of themselves, with things that we've talked about, just being distracted and exhausted, and not feeling as motivated or energized or optimistic. So you're also needing to get to know this new person for a little while. People do, I think, in some ways, not go back to the way things were in the way, but they do find their way to parts of themselves that you'll recognize again, so that's going to require the patience, from the friend. I would also say, again, speaking to the friend too, is that also knowing when you need to take a step back, when because maybe you have had your own losses or you've gone through things. So, you have to also be really careful of your own triggers, and then the things that may be difficult to you. We want to be supportive, but we want to be able to do it over a longer term, which is only going to happen if we're good with our own boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think I'll see, say a widow will come in and it will be early and they'll be like, oh, my support system's amazing. And
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but I'm always like, well, hopefully it stays that way, but give it some time.
Yeah.
And then they'll come in at 6 months and they're like, oh, nobody's there anymore.
Yeah.
The phone calls have stopped, everything, my support, I don't know what's happened to them. And then I've heard some stories where people have had their friends and loved ones tell them, it's time to move on. No more talking about them. and how hard that is for somebody. So, there may not be the right thing to say, right? As Brene Brown says, rarely does an empathetic response make a difference. It's connection that counts, right? It is sitting with somebody, sharing. I think Alan Wolfelt came out with a new book recently, and it talks about like having a cup of tea with somebody. I forget the name of the book, but it talks about just being that companion to somebody on their grief journey and holding that space and just sitting with them,
Yeah.
whatever feeling that is and whatever emotion they're having, to just be with them, to use their loved one's name. And to, my opinion is avoid the cliched responses.
Yeah.
That is probably the thing that annoys my clients the most.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
be mindful of the questions you're asking. If it was suicide, you don't need to ask how it happened,
Right.
because most of my clients don't want to share those details.
Yeah.
People kind of get a little nosy and want to know all the details, or they'll be like, what are you going to do with the house at the funeral? Like, people
Yeah.
aren't thinking about that right then and there. So
Yeah. Oh my gosh, no. Yeah, what I always think about, and actually I think about this for me too, just in doing this work, is who are you asking this question for? Are you
Mhm.
asking this question because you're curious, or because it's going to help the person you're talking to and it's going to, further the conversation and the connection? And that answer should be pretty clear, and that should then tell you if it's a good question to ask or not. Maybe there will be time that you learn more, but sometimes you just have to accept the fact that there may be things that you're not going to know in terms of details, and that's not even necessarily what's most important in that moment, because supporting your friend is. The other thing I was thinking about too is that the idea of like judgment, because we're it's very natural that we're going to have our own assumptions or judgment based on, like I just did a group last night for, people who have lost a parent that they had an estranged relationship with,
Mhm. Yeah,
and how that becomes a very complicated grief, because you love your parent, you're grieving your parent, but the grief, feels different.
absolutely.
And, it could be that if my friend didn't have a good relationship with her parent and then loses her parent, I could assume that her grief isn't going to be as big, because over the past 20 years we've known each other, I've only heard bad things about this parent.
Yeah.
And then meanwhile, she's grieving very heavily. And it's like, what the heck? That doesn't match up. So,
Mhm.
we really just have to accept the grieving person's level of grief as where they're at and where they need to be, without thinking that it's too much or that it should look differently. We have to trust them. And I think sometimes grieving people think that the people around them almost feel like they're like looking for pity or something, like because I'm still grieving, but it's
Mhm.
not that. So trust your grieving friend,
Yep,
that
absolutely.
they're on the right path for themselves. So
Exactly. And
yeah.
even as a grief counselor, I'm going to be honest, when I go to a funeral, I don't know what to say all the
Me
time.
neither. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you said that. I'm the same way. Yeah.
Because I'm not a fan of saying I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
don't know why. For me and my own grief journey, that wasn't something that was something meaningful to me. Actually, I was, as an angry teenager, I'd be like, why you didn't do this to my mom?
Okay.
I was very angry.
Yeah.
So it's not something that I will say when I go to a funeral, but then I struggle with me not say, do I not say anything?
No.
Like,
Well,
so
because
are
it's
there
so short. It's so short, the time,
exactly.
and I guess that's what it comes back to, like finding the right words. And I have to remind myself of that, I'm trying, like, and that people know what we do for a living. So oddly, I feel like there's almost a little bit of pressure to say the right thing. And I want to be like, listen, like, let's go, let's talk in a month and we can talk all afternoon. And I would like to think I would be able to support you and help you. But in that moment, again, that they don't really even know who's there, what's happening, all that other kind of stuff. So, usually if it's appropriate, just giving the person a hug, or, something along those lines, and saying, listen, like, I'm going to check in with you, and checking in and just telling them that I'm going to be checking in with you, and then doing it.
Yep. And I had a friend, and after her husband died, I was just send her texts every few weeks.
Hmm.
And I think probably 90% of the time she never responded.
Yeah.
But that it wasn't for I didn't need a response. I just wanted her to know that I was continuing to think about her.
Yeah. 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 It's about having a little bit of a thick skin and not taking things personally. That's for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think, realizing that when you're not hearing back, it's not about you. That's hard for all of us. I don't care who we are. We
Mhm.
feel like if we put something out there, we do have an expectation. So I will kind of talk to people like, don't focus on the outcome. you think about why you're doing it. I'm sending it so that they know I'm thinking about them. Well, then you achieve that and leave it there, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
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 Well, I think honestly, we could probably do a part
Y-
2 and a part 10 on this,
Yes,
topic and continue.
absolutely.
So, but to be mindful of time, we'll stop here for now, and we'll come back, hopefully with this topic again, because I definitely think it's something that's important for us to talk
Oh,
about, and
for sure.
maybe give some other ways also for a grieving individual to be able to ask for that support that they need as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That'd be a good one. Okay. Thanks,
all
Kelly.
right, so stay tuned. Take care.